Very good evening to you, and thank you for joining us on the big story this evening. Today is Wednesday, the 26th day of June 2024, and on the big story, we're talking about something absolutely critical to this country, and we're talking about the issue of security this evening. My name is George Natural Onwara, and this evening we're looking at the matter of insecurity in the country. Particularly, we're going to emphasize the insecurity situation in the Northwest. Right. So, joining us this evening to discuss the matter that we do have to talk about is none other than Chris Ngodo, who is a conflict security and governance analyst, is joining us to discuss this issue. And of course, he also will also be joined by our second guest later on as the show progresses. Good evening, sir, and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good evening, George.
Yes, a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the past decade has seen the growth and escalation of a new manifestation of violence in West Africa and particularly in Nigeria, like criminal gangs often referred to as bandits in ungoverned areas in the northwest of Nigeria, joining Nigeria's list of problematic non-state armed groups. Now, alarmingly, there are thousands of these bandits spread across the groups, different groups in the northwest of Nigeria. And so this evening, we'll be looking at the issues that having these particular groups acting in the capacity that they act actually pose for us as a people and indeed as a nation. So let's start by asking your own assessment of the government's handling of the issue of insecurity in the country so far, vis-a-vis or with particular emphasis to the Northwest.
Thank you very much, George. The Northwest, the crisis situation in the Northwest has been ongoing for close to a decade now. It evolved out of cattle rustling and then progressively degenerated into much more violent crime, including kidnapping, raiding of communities, and then essentially a state of warfare between vigilantes in the northwestern states and the bandit groups themselves. So over the last 10 years, we've seen an escalation, a progressive escalation of military activities or operations within that region, targeting these groups. Within that period, the federal government has launched no less than 4 military operations aimed at disrupting these groups. It has met with moderate success with these operations, but the numbers of these gangs remain significant enough to pose a threat to civil life in those areas. And so, these past 2 days. This week in Katsina, the Northwestern governors came together. It's the third such occasion for them coming together to deliberate on issues around kinetic and non-kinetic strategies for tackling the situation of insecurity in the zone. So that happened on Monday and Tuesday, and there have been very important commitments made to anchor what the state governments are doing to what the federal government is doing as well. So that is where and how matters stand at this time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you actually have given us a brief, background to the security summit that actually happened in the Northwest, right? But I'm curious, as your own assessment of the handling overall, can you say it's acceptable? Now, and I say this because if you remember correctly, the former governor of Zamfara State, Bello Matawalle, did say that in his state, at the time, in the north actually, that about 30,000 of these bandits were actually operating, right? And he says he was going to continue to basically engage in conversations on dialogues with them. Do you think that approach is the best that he and other governors, and indeed the federal government too, could have done?
The federal government and the state government both use a balance of kinetic and non-kinetic approaches. There is a recognition that these kinds of conflicts the world over are not solved by kinetic force or military force alone. And so when the previous governor or even the current administration discusses using non-kinetic tools, it is not to the exclusion of military action. It is about balancing military action with non-kinetic non-kinetic tools to achieve a desired outcome. The idea is understanding that the numbers we are dealing with are somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 of these elements within the zone. That is a huge number, and all that military force that is not tempered by any real non-kinetic strategy or a much more comprehensive approach to dealing with this will simply result in much more radicalization of the communities on the ground. So it's very much a balanced approach between using kinetic tools and non-kinetic tools. That is what the government is speaking to, and that is what the government has adopted as its own approach. It's not that there is not a military approach. There is a military approach. But it is well recognized the world over that this kind of conflicts, which are essentially insurgencies with social grievances at their roots, cannot be tackled or even ended by solely military means. Hence the adoption of non-kinetic measures to complement the military operations that are already taking place.
Very interesting submission there. But again, I wonder, right, because I did see a news article just about, I think about an hour ago or thereabout, where one of the terror kingpins in a northern state was actually received in a community, right? And they were basically praising him. Do you think that the people too also have a role to play in all of this in terms of the continuance of the insecurity that has plagued us for so long?
Well, what has happened in a lot of those communities is that they become essentially held hostage by these gangs, by these armed groups. And so communities with those situations will do what they have to do to exist, to continue to survive and to continue to exist. I think that the human instinct for self-preservation is very understandable in this sort of instance. So it is not a surprise to me at all that such a thing has happened. These incidents have been recorded in a few communities where gangsters or bandit kingpins are constantly being received by the communities out of fear that rejecting them will result in very severe reprisal action against them. So the communities therefore do what they have to do in terms of their own survival to appease these groups. It is not dissimilar to what you have in the Niger Delta, for example, where elements that we refer to as militant, but are themselves bandits of some description, are welcomed in those communities or are regarded almost as heroic figures within those communities. In fact, I would say that the difference is that within the northwestern communities, it's not so much that the bandits are regarded as heroes. It is simply a question of survival by appeasement. And so that's the difference between these two scenarios. But certainly, in a situation where communities are held hostage by these armed groups, it should not be surprising that people are taking whatever measures they deem necessary to ensure their survival.
Well, it's interesting to note that at that particular security summit that you talked about and that you were a part of, yes. Now, the Sultan of Sokoto made some interesting assertions. I'd like us to take a listen to him a bit.
To tell ourselves the home truth. What we must do to challenge these bandits, because we all know the consequences of this banditry and insurgency on the morale and on our lives. But it will take decades to get out of it, if at all we get out of it, because we all know the consequences and we know the problems. It's time to ask the question, why are things still in the state they are today, despite the tons of money spent on procuring equipment for the services and also for the well-being of the personnel, and also what the governors have been doing to bring to an end this insecurity. We need to ask this question for us to discuss and move and know how to move forward.
Now, if you listen to the Sultan of Sokoto correctly, he said it's actually going to take some decades to have this challenge actually solved. What's your take on this, right? Because it kind of sounds bleak for a lot of people listening to him.
Well, I don't. It shouldn't. While yes, perhaps also decades does seem alarming. The Niger Delta, for example, has been militarized for close to 4 decades now. More than one generation has been born into a militarized Niger Delta. The insurgency in the northeast has been ongoing for over 15 years at this point. So these insurgencies, the world over, they do take time. Excuse me. They do take time to resolve. So I would not be too concerned about the specific phrasing of the Sultan's language. I think the most important point is that these conflicts tend to be long-term conflicts, and all kinds of whatever engagement we choose or whatever tools we choose to engage these people, we must bear in mind that there will be no overnight miracles. This is not something that is going to be ended quickly. With commitment, this is something that we will be able to see the end of, but we have to prepare ourselves to be in this for the long haul.
All right, we've just been joined by Abubakar Dansansu, who is a journalist from Katsina. Well, good evening to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining me in the program.
Absolutely. Now, can you give us a feel of what the security summit that you did attend actually was like?
Well, on Monday 25th, on 24th and 25th this month, the Northwestern Governors Forum held a summit concerning the security situation in the region. They talked about several issues on how to use kinetic and non-kinetic measures in order to curb the menace, especially this time when the season. Most peasant farmers are preparing to go to farm, and the security situation looks so deteriorating because the bandits and the criminals are issuing notice to the farmers that they will never farm this rainy season. And if they could not farm, there will be a shortage of food. That is the threat of food security in northern part of Nigeria. We are having several series of persistent attacks in most vulnerable 8 local government areas in Katsina State, precisely Kankara and the Paskari, Damusa, Kankara, Basari, and they are the local government that borders the Zamfara and Niger states. So even last week, there was an attack on one town, Megora, in Damusa local government, where more than 8 people were killed, as reported by several media organizations in Nigeria, and 50 people were kidnapped, including women and children. And they issued notice that a threat from the bandit that they should never go to the farm. That is the situation we're having now concerning security in Katsina, precisely.
I'm really curious about the feeling of the people, right? As far as the security summit is concerned, are they optimistic that the governors, having met together, will actually take the necessary measures to curb this insecurity in the region?
Well, people are not optimistic. They are pessimistic about the summit that the governors held in Katsina State. Because there were several meetings that were held concerning security, but have not yet made a positive impact concerning the security in the state. On Tuesday, on Tuesday, there is one program I used to anchor, which is a Chamber and a current affairs program. I interview an analyst. He said that they don't see any change from maybe the security summit that the governors held in USA, that is in America, concerning security in the state, even the one that was just maybe concluded yesterday. People are saying that the governors are just using the state resources, squandering it, instead of them maybe using it to empower the people that are being displaced by the banditry in the northern part of Nigeria.
It's interesting. Thank you very much. But let's go back to Mr. Ngodo, right? Now, I'm curious, what's your take on what he just told us, right? Because according to him, the people in the region are pretty much pessimistic about the whole thing's going on. What does the optic look like to you? Because the governor some time ago went to the US and they had a meeting, right? And then now they've had another one here in the Northwest as well. Is this some kind of continuum? Is it really necessary? Is it as the people he just reported to us as flamboyant, or perhaps it's really just them working as much as or as hard as they need to work?
Well, I think the pessimism is understandable given the situation there. That is reflective of perhaps a lack of confidence in the institutions of government, and a lack of confidence again is quite understandable under the circumstances. So it is entirely up to the governors, the government, the state governments, and the federal administration, and all the institutions concerned to work to earn the confidence of the people in their abilities and in their capacity to be to protect them and to secure them.
Now, I'm curious as to the impact that this is going to have, all right? The journalist Abubakar Dansunsu has actually told us that farming is a challenge for majority of them in the north, particularly the northwest now, right? And so I'm curious, how is this going to affect the rest of the country? Or perhaps it doesn't concern the rest of the country, it's just the thing of the northwest?
Well, given that the northwest is or part of our agrarian belt is within the most agriculturally productive zone of the country, along with the north central. So we will likely continue to see an escalation of food insecurity and food inflation across the country. Cereals, grains, millet, etc., which are grown especially in the northwestern area, will be impacted by that specifically. So this is not something that is really a northwestern problem or a regional problem. It is a national problem. And southern urbanites, for the most part, get a lot of their food from northern Nigeria. So we can expect that these things will impact prices even in the south. So that is it is a really national type of situation. It's not one that we can think of as being sequestered in one part of the country.
Well, Abubakar, let's come back to you. You're actually resident in the region, right? Yes, you're actually resident. Yes, you're resident in the region, right? So I'm curious, what kind of local solutions have you had the people tout that can actually solve the challenge that is being faced?
Actually, next 2 to 3 months, when there will be a huge rural to urban migration because of persistent bandit attack in northern Nigeria. There will be a food shortage because farmers can no longer to farm, and it will affect also education.
Well, apparently we'll just try to reestablish connection with Abubakar Dansunsu there, and then we'll get back to you. However, let's come back to Mr. Chris Ngodo, right? Now, he said some really shall I say, alarming things, right? Because he's talked about rural-urban migration for a lot of people in these regions that are primarily affected by the insecurity there. Now, this obviously has impact for the rest of the country where they're going to migrate to. Do you think a lot of these other states have the capacity to actually cater for the excess load, if I may put it that way, that will come into their domains?
It's not really a question of capacity. The scenario is one of escalating internal migration and internal displacement. And people will move wherever they need to move to in order to secure their own lives. So it's not really a question so much of whether the states have capacity or not. Most states probably do not have enough social infrastructure even for their own population, but that is irrelevant. So those people will move wherever they need to go to in order to survive, in order to preserve their lives. I should say that if you look at over the last 12 years, Nigeria has had two major floods, one in 2012, one in 2022. Both of them displaced 2 million people each. Those people, a great number of them did not return to their communities, and they were dispersed into other places. So internal migration is a fact of life. It's something that goes on all the time. It's not just driven by conflict.
Yeah, but not in the quantity that this insecurity is actually going to drive.
2 million people is the population of Botswana. It's already happened, and you didn't notice. Every day people come to Lagos. Every day. People move. Rural-urban migration has been happening for decades. And the conflict in the Northwest did not start today. It's been ongoing for years. So I would not, I wouldn't particularly latch on to that. It would be significant, yes, but no more significant than what we've already had happen over the last decade. Rural-urban migration has been happening and continues to happen, whether it is driven by conflict or driven by climate change-induced phenomena. So this will continue to be a persistent trend until those areas can be made secure for the people living there.
All right. We have successfully reconnected to Abubakar Dansusu, who's a journalist joining us from Katsina. Well, good to have you back. So you were trying to land on your point. Let's go ahead.
Yes, I was saying earlier, there will be a huge rural-urban migration. It will affect also a health center in Katsina, even northern Nigeria, because the health facilities becomes also the target of the banditry or bandit attack in the northern Nigeria. Even this affect the many displaced persons who are also migrating, roaming around the streets in the urban areas. They don't have shelter, and like in Katsina, the governments of Katsina do not have an official IDP here. So most of these displaced person hardly gets a place to maybe to sit or sleep or get comfort. So they are vulnerable to many diseases, and even within the city, the state is facing a difficulty to cover or even to bridge the gap of maybe health provision in the state. And also, if you look at the situation, because instead even the northern Nigeria is poverty rate, even the poverty rate will increase, and also it will also lead to maybe so many, I don't want to say it maybe crisis, because people will lose their job.
One of the major challenges that's recently cropped up is the fact that, and this question is for you, Sangodo now is the fact that international organizations are beginning to say, hey, look, there's a heightened risk of malnutrition going on in the north. Yes, and so what do you make of this, though? Do you think that those in positions of authority have so far done as much as they should have as far as taking care of some of these people who are displaced by the insecurity that have happened in their local communities? And how can we do better, really, because we're beginning to round off?
Well, that has to do with the management of internal displacement. So those mechanisms have to be improved. They have to be scaled up because they are currently overwhelmed by the sheer numbers that are coming through. So that needs to be scaled up, and not just at the national level, but at the state level and at the local level. Our emergency management, national emergency management architecture provides for 3 tiers of management at the federal, at the state, and at the local. Often you have the mechanisms present at the federal, but by the time you go down to the state and the local, it diminishes in capacity. So we need to scale up capacities in those areas at the local and at the state level.
Now, coming back to you, Abubakar Dansusu, I'm curious though, right? Because if you listened, and I'm sure you did, the governor of Katsina State was actually saying, look, we need to resort to community intelligence, one, and the use of, technological tools like drones and all whatnot in the fight against insecurity in the region. Now, first off, how well How well can you say that community intelligence has actually been applied to the fight against insecurity in the region? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, do you think, right, that technology will actually better the fight against insecurity in the region based on the fact that you are there?
I think to this end, the government of Katsina State have not maybe made use of any technology in order to gather intelligence about the movements and the activities of bandits within the local communities, because local communities are not included. There was no inclusion of local communities in order to fight the security. The only thing you can hear is on the media that we need community collaboration in order to fight this, but there was no any I think initiative to ensure that maybe security are inside or maybe security are involved. Because the security need maybe to create awareness, they need to draw closer, they need to maybe be informed, maybe drawn closer. Government officials need to meet them, maybe to have access about such information. Because most of those bandits, they live closer to the community than the urban areas where the government officials live. So I don't think Katsina State government have so far recently established a local community security watch corps, but has not even yielded a positive result. So I think it's better. It's a good initiative with the maybe government maybe use this opportunity to also collaborate with the local community in order to get the intelligence about the bandits. But also the government must know that they should, if they although the governor said that he will never have maybe a dialogue with the bandit unless if the bandit surrender himself with the arms. So I think it's a high time the government understand the bandits and the local communities, because they are the majority victims of such banditry. It's a high time government need to listen, maybe to use another approach in order to ensure that maybe the bandits lessen their attack, or maybe the community understand how to protect themselves, or even arm the community.
All right.
Because the security, I checked, so the security agents are not enough. Even the manpower, the equipment, the weapons, security agents have been crying that the weapons are not adequate for them to fight the insurgents. So I think it's high time the government raisers and maybe use the intelligence, arm the maybe community, also train them how to gather intelligence reports.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it at this. Thank you so much to you, Abubakar Dansunsu, a journalist joining us all the way from Katsina and talking to us this evening. And also thank you to Chris Ngwodo, who's a conflict security and governance analyst. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as well.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well,
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hoping that you will always join us whenever we call on you to talk about some of these discussions here on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. I want to say thank you to you too, our listener, for joining us and listening to the conversation. In the next few seconds, as a matter of fact, we'll go straight into the round table where you too can join in and have your own say on the matter that we're talking about this evening. My name is George Natural Onwara. I'll return shortly.